The auction block stood in the center of Bonanza, Colorado's dusty Main Street, a shameful spectacle that drew a crowd of curious onlookers and opportunistic bidders on that sweltering July afternoon in 1878. Jennifer Marie stood upon that weathered wooden platform with her chin held high despite the tears streaming down her face, her father's debts printed on a notice nailed to the post beside her, the sum so staggering it made grown men whistle low and shake their heads. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his collar, called out numbers while Jennifer tried to disappear into herself, to imagine she was anywhere but here, anywhere but being sold like cattle to pay for her father's gambling losses and bad business decisions. She had worn her Sunday dress, the pale blue cotton that her mother had sewn before the fever took her 3 years past, because if she was going to face this humiliation, she would do it with whatever dignity remained to her. The fabric clung to her skin in the oppressive heat, and she could feel dozens of eyes crawling over her like insects. Men she had known her entire life, shopkeepers and ranchers, miners and drifters, all studying her as though she were a horse they might consider purchasing. The shame burned hotter than the Colorado sun beating down on her honey-colored hair. Her father stood off to the side, unable to meet her eyes, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Marcus Miller had once been a proud man, a businessman with dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. Instead, he had struck nothing but debt, gambling away their home, their savings, everything they had. When the creditors came calling, when they threatened prison or worse, the marshal had offered this alternative: put his daughter up for indentured servitude until the debt was paid. $7,000. It might as well have been $7 million. Jennifer was 21 years old, and she had never imagined her life would come to this. The bidding had started slow, cautious. A few dollars here and there from men looking for cheap labor, for a cook or a housekeeper. Then Silas Blackthorne had stepped forward, the owner of the largest saloon in Bonanza, and the nature of the bidding had changed. Everyone knew what Blackthorne wanted, what kind of work he had in mind for a pretty young woman. The numbers climbed higher, and Jennifer felt her stomach turn to ice. That was when she first noticed him. He stood at the back of the crowd, tall and lean, with a black hat pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the other men who pushed forward eagerly, he remained perfectly still, watching with an intensity that made her breath catch. She could not see his face clearly, but she could feel the weight of his gaze, different somehow from the others. Not assessing her value like merchandise, but seeing her as something else entirely. Blackthorne's bid reached $2,000, and the auctioneer was preparing to call it final when the stranger's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. $7,000. The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward in shocked silence. Jennifer's eyes widened. The entire sum of her father's debt, offered in one bid without hesitation. The crowd parted as the stranger walked forward, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each measured step. He was perhaps 27 or 28, she guessed, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong lines and sharp angles, with eyes the color of the sky before a storm. "Now see here," the auctioneer sputtered, "that is quite irregular. The standard terms call for $7,000, the stranger repeated, pulling a thick envelope from inside his worn leather vest. Cash, to settle the debt in full. He counted out the bills right there on the street, crisp notes that must have represented years of hard work and careful saving. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he placed the money in the auctioneer's trembling hands. Jennifer could not move, could not breathe, could not process what was happening. No one paid that kind of money without expecting something substantial in return. The auctioneer counted the bills twice, his eyes growing wider with each note. "This is most unusual, Mr. Taylor Xander," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. "And I believe that settles the matter. The debt is paid." "Well, yes, but the terms of servitude—" "There are no terms," Taylor said flatly. "The debt is settled. Miss Miller is free to go." Jennifer felt the platform sway beneath her feet, or perhaps that was just the world tilting on its axis. Free? It made no sense. Men did not pay $7,000 and ask for nothing. There had to be a catch, some terrible price she would be expected to pay. The auctioneer looked between Taylor and Jennifer, clearly at a loss. "Sir, I am not sure you understand the nature of this transaction. The young lady was being sold into service to work off—" "I understand perfectly," Taylor interrupted, his storm-gray eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. "Her father owed $7,000. I just paid $7,000. The debt is settled and Miss Miller owes nothing to anyone." Silas Blackthorne pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. You cannot simply—" Taylor turned to face him, and something in his expression made Blackthorne take an involuntary step backward. "I can, and I did. Unless you have a legal objection." The marshal, who had been watching from the shade of the general store, stepped forward. "The money is good, the debt is paid. Far as I am concerned, this matter is concluded." He looked up at Jennifer. "You are free to go, Miss Miller." Jennifer climbed down from the platform on shaking legs, her mind reeling. Her father rushed forward to embrace her, sobbing his gratitude and shame against her shoulder, but she barely felt him. Her eyes were fixed on Taylor Xander, trying to understand why any man would do such a thing. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at being denied their spectacle. Taylor tipped his hat to the marshal and turned to leave, but Jennifer found her voice at last. "Wait." She pulled away from her father and hurried after him. "Mr. Xander, please wait." He stopped and turned, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "Why?" she asked, the single word containing 1,000 questions. "Why would you do that? What do you want from me?" He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or memory. "I do not want anything from you, Miss Miller. Consider it a gift, no strings attached." "A gift?" she laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "That was $7,000. No one gives away that kind of money for nothing. What do you really want?" His jaw tightened. "Once someone helped me when I needed it most. They asked for nothing in return. I am simply paying that forward." "I do not believe you," she said, though she desperately wanted to. "There has to be more to it than that." "Believe what you want," he said quietly. "But you are free. What you do with that freedom is your own choice." He started to walk away again, and panic flared in Jennifer's chest. She could not let him disappear like this, not when nothing made sense, not when she owed him everything. "At least let me thank you properly," she called after him. "Let me buy you dinner, or—" "No need," he said without turning around. "Please," she said, and the desperation in her voice surprised even herself. "I need to understand, I need to know why." That made him pause. He stood still for several heartbeats, then slowly turned to face her once more. "There is nothing to understand, Miss Miller. Sometimes people do kind things because it is the right thing to do, not because they expect payment." "The right thing to do," she repeated softly. "You just gave away $7,000 because it was right." "I gave away money. I do not need to help someone who did," he corrected. "And now I have done it, and you are free, and that is the end of the story." But Jennifer could see it was not the end, not really. She could see the way his hands clenched at his sides, the tension in his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained between them. He was lying, or at least not telling her the whole truth. There was more to this, more to him. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "Here in Bonanza for a few days," he admitted. "I have business at the bank." "Then have dinner with me tonight," she said firmly. "Not as payment, not as obligation, just as one person to another. Please. I cannot simply walk away from this without at least knowing who you are." He seemed to war with himself, his expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for her to read. Finally, he nodded once curtly. "The hotel dining room. 6 o'clock. But only because you clearly will not rest until you get some answers, and I would prefer you not follow me around town all day." The corner of Jennifer's mouth quirked up despite everything. Was I that obvious? "You are standing in the middle of the street arguing with a stranger who just bought your freedom," he pointed out. "Yes, you are obvious." This time when he walked away, she let him go, watching his tall figure disappear into the afternoon crowds. Her father approached hesitantly, his face haggard with shame and relief. "Jenny, I am so sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I could win it back, thought I could fix everything." She looked at him, this man who had once been so strong and capable, now reduced to a shell of himself by his own poor choices. She should be angry. She was angry. But she was also exhausted and overwhelmed and still trying to process what had just happened. "We will talk about this later," she said quietly. "Right now, I need to think." She walked back to the small boarding house where they had been staying since losing their home, climbed the stairs to the tiny room they could barely afford, and sat on the narrow bed. Her hands were shaking. She had been so certain her life was over, that she would spend the next decade working off her father's debts in whatever capacity her buyer demanded. She had been preparing herself for the worst, steeling herself to endure whatever came. And then Taylor Xander had appeared like something out of a story, paying an impossible sum and asking for nothing. It made no sense. People did not act this way, not in the real world. There had to be something he wanted, some price she would eventually be expected to pay. But when she replayed the conversation in her mind, when she remembered the way he looked at her not with desire or possession, but with something almost like understanding, she wondered if perhaps she was wrong. The hours until dinner crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jennifer changed her dress 3 times, unsure what was appropriate for this bizarre situation. Finally, she settled on her green calico, the one that brought out the color of her eyes, then felt foolish for caring what she looked like. This was not a social call. This was simply an attempt to understand what had happened and why. She arrived at the hotel dining room precisely at 6 o'clock, her stomach fluttering with nerves. Taylor was already there, seated at a corner table, his hat resting on the chair beside him. He stood when she approached, holding her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that felt out of place in rough-and-tumble Bonanza. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat. "You did not leave me much choice," he replied, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. The waitress brought them coffee and menus, and for a few minutes they busied themselves with the mundane task of ordering food. Jennifer found herself studying him when he was not looking, taking in details she had missed in the chaos of the afternoon. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked with cattle and horses. His clothes were well worn but clean, practical rather than fashionable. He wore no jewelry except a simple silver watch chain. Everything about him spoke of practicality and hard work. "So," she said once the waitress had gone, "will you tell me the real story now?" He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes steady over the rim of the cup. "What makes you think there is more to tell?" "Because people do not carry around $7,000 in cash unless they have a very specific purpose in mind," she said. "Because you knew exactly how much my father's debt was without asking." Because you looked at me during that auction like you understood exactly how I felt, standing up there on display." His expression shifted, something dark and painful crossing his features. He set down his cup carefully, precisely, as though it required all his concentration. "You are perceptive," he said quietly. "I am not foolish," she corrected. "Though my father's actions might suggest otherwise about our family, so please tell me the truth. Why did you do this?" Taylor was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, focused on something far beyond the walls of the dining room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "5 years ago, my sister was put on an auction block much like the one you stood on today. Different town, different circumstances, but the same desperate situation. My father had died, leaving debts we did not know about. I was working a cattle drive, 2 states away, trying to earn enough to keep our small ranch running. I did not even know what was happening until it was too late." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. "What happened to her?" "A man bought her," Taylor said flatly. "Paid the debt, took her to his ranch, told everyone she was his housekeeper, but we all knew the truth. She was 20 years old and had no choice in the matter." "Oh God," Jennifer whispered. "I rode home as fast as I could when I got the news," Taylor continued, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Took me 3 weeks to get there. When I arrived, I went straight to that ranch, ready to take her back by force if necessary, but she would not leave." "Why not?" "Because in those 3 weeks, something unexpected had happened," he said, and now there was a different tone in his voice, something almost like wonder. "The man who bought her, Jacob, he was not what anyone expected. He treated her with respect, gave her a choice to stay or go, offered her honest work at honest wages. They talked, spent time together, discovered they had more in common than either anticipated. By the time I arrived, they were courting properly." Jennifer stared at him, trying to process this twist in the story. "They fell in love." "They did," Taylor confirmed. "I did not believe it at first. Thought she was just saying what he wanted to hear, afraid of what he might do if she rejected him. But I stayed for a few weeks, watched them together, and realized it was real. He loved her and she loved him. They were married that fall, and they have been happy together ever since." "That is an extraordinary story," Jennifer said softly. "But I still do not understand what it has to do with me." Taylor met her eyes directly for the first time, and the intensity of his gaze made her heart skip. "Before I left, Jacob took me aside and gave me something. The same $7,000 he had paid for Caroline's debt. He said he did not buy her, he bought her freedom, and now that she was choosing to stay of her own will, the money should go back where it belonged. He told me to use it wisely, to help someone else the way he helped my sister." 5 years, Jennifer said, understanding dawning. "You have been carrying that money for 5 years. I have been looking for the right opportunity," he said. "I added to it over the years, working cattle drives and saving every penny, waiting for a situation where I could make a real difference, where someone truly needed help. When I heard about the auction today, heard your story, I knew this was what I had been waiting for." The waitress arrived with their food, breaking the intensity of the moment. Jennifer looked down at her plate without seeing it, her mind whirling. The story made sense, explained his actions in a way that was both logical and deeply moving, but it also raised new questions. "So you are paying forward a kindness," she said slowly. "That is genuinely why you did this." "It is," he confirmed. "And you want nothing from me." "No expectations, no obligations, none," he said firmly. "You are free, Jennifer, completely free. What you do with that freedom is entirely up to you." Hearing her name from his lips sent a strange shiver through her. No one had called her by her Christian name in weeks, not since the debts became public knowledge, and she became an object of pity and gossip rather than a person. They ate in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, the tension that had stretched between them easing into something else. Jennifer found herself watching the way he cut his steak, the careful precision of his movements. He had the manners of someone who had been raised properly, but had spent enough time in rough company to have worn down the edges. "What will you do now?" he asked eventually. The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on surviving the day, on getting through the auction and whatever came after, that she had not thought beyond it. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I should look for work. My father and I have been living in a boarding house, and while the debt is paid, we still need income. I can sew, cook, manage a household. Surely someone in town needs help." "Your father," Taylor said carefully. "What will he do?" Jennifer's expression hardened. "That is an excellent question. One I intend to get an answer to very soon. He cannot continue like this, gambling and making promises he cannot keep. Something has to change." "Change is hard for people," Taylor observed, "especially when they are trying to outrun shame. You sound like you have experience with that." "I spent 5 years watching my sister build a new life with a man who started as her owner," he said. "I have learned a few things about shame and redemption." They talked for hours, long after their plates were cleared and the dining room began to empty. Jennifer found herself telling him things she had not told anyone about her mother's death, about watching her father spiral into desperation and debt, about the loneliness of being the only family he had left and feeling responsible for fixing his mistakes. Taylor listened without judgment, offering no advice, just his steady presence and occasional nods of understanding. In turn, he told her about his life on the trail, about the cattle drives that took him from Texas to Kansas and everywhere in between. He spoke of endless skies and dangerous river crossings, of nights spent under the stars and days in the saddle until every muscle ached. He had a way of describing things that made her see them vividly, feel the dust and heat and vast emptiness of the frontier. "You ever settle down?" she asked. "Or are you always moving?" "I have a small ranch in Wyoming," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it is mine. I spend winters there, work the trail drives in summer to earn extra money. It is a good life, simple but honest." "It sounds lonely," she said before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his eyes. "Sometimes it is," he admitted, "but loneliness is better than being trapped in a situation that makes you miserable." "Is that what you think would happen if you settled down?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "You would be miserable." "I think I have not met anyone who would want the kind of life I lead," he said carefully. "It is hard work and long hours, and the ranch is barely profitable most years. It is no life for someone who wants comfort and security." "Some people value things other than comfort," Jennifer said softly. Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them, some unspoken acknowledgement of a connection forming. Taylor broke the gaze first, clearing his throat and reaching for his coffee cup. "It is getting late," he said. "I should walk you back to your boarding house." The night air was cool and welcome after the warmth of the dining room. Bonanza's streets were quieter now, most of the shops closed, only the saloon still bright with lamplight and noise. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "When are you leaving town?" Jennifer asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "A few days," he said. "I need to conclude my business at the bank, pick up some supplies. Then I am heading back north." "To Wyoming," she said, and it sounded impossibly far away. "Yes." They reached the boarding house too soon. Jennifer stopped at the bottom of the steps, turning to face him. In the moonlight, his features were softer, the hard edges smoothed away. "Thank you," she said, and the words encompassed so much more than just the dinner. "For everything." For my freedom, for listening, for treating me like a person instead of property. You will never know what that means to me." "I think I have some idea," he said gently. She wanted to say more, to find a way to keep him standing here talking to her, but she could not find the words. Finally, she simply nodded and turned to go inside. "Jennifer," he called softly, stopping her with one foot on the bottom step. She turned back, hopeful without knowing quite what she hoped for. "If you need anything while I am still in town," he said, "I am staying at the hotel. Room 12. Do not hesitate to ask." "I will not need anything," she said, but she memorized the room number anyway. "But thank you." She went inside before she could do something foolish, like ask him to stay longer or tell him she did not want him to leave at all. It made no sense to feel this way about a man she had just met, a stranger who had rescued her from an impossible situation. This was gratitude she was feeling, nothing more. It had to be. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to her father snore in the other narrow cot, she could not stop thinking about Taylor Xander. About the way he looked at her, really looked at her, seeing who she was beneath the shame and fear. About the quiet strength in his voice when he told her she was free. About the loneliness she heard in his words when he spoke of his ranch in Wyoming. She fell asleep thinking about open skies and simple honesty, and dreamed of riding across endless plains with the wind in her hair. The next morning, Jennifer woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt in months. The debt was paid, she was free, and now she needed to figure out what came next. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find her father already awake, sitting at the small table in their room with his head in his hands. "We need to talk," she said firmly. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Jenny, I know I have failed you, failed your mother's memory. I do not know how to make it right. You can start by promising me you will never gamble again," she said. "Not a single card game, not a single bet. I mean it, Father. That man yesterday gave us a second chance, a miracle we did not deserve. If you throw it away again, I will not stand by you. I will leave and make my own way in the world." The harshness of her words seemed to strike him physically. He flinched, then slowly nodded. "You are right. You are absolutely right. I promise, Jenny, no more gambling. I will find honest work, rebuild what I destroyed." "See that you do," she said, softening slightly. "Because I love you, Father, but I will not watch you destroy yourself and take me down with you again." They talked for over an hour, making plans and setting boundaries. Her father would look for work today, any honest labor he could find. Jennifer would seek employment as well, something that would allow them to save money and eventually rent a proper house again. They would live simply, spend carefully, and slowly rebuild their lives. When their conversation concluded, Jennifer left the boarding house with a specific destination in mind. She walked through town to the hotel, her heart beating faster with each step. She should not be doing this. She had no good reason to seek him out. But she wanted to see him again, wanted to talk to him without the weight of the auction and her near servitude hanging over them. She knocked on the door of room 12 before she could lose her nerve. Taylor answered after a moment, looking surprised to see her. He had removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms tanned dark by years in the sun. "Jennifer," he said, and again she felt that shiver at hearing her name from his lips. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she assured him quickly. "I just wanted to talk to you if you have time. I can come back later if this is inconvenient." "No, it is fine," he said, stepping back to let her in. "I was just going over some papers for the bank. Please come in." She hesitated. A respectable woman did not enter a man's hotel room unchaperoned. But then, a respectable woman also did not get put up on an auction block, and she had already crossed that bridge yesterday. She stepped inside. The room was sparse but clean, with a bed, a small table, and a chair by the window. Taylor's saddlebags were stacked neatly in the corner, his hat hanging on a peg by the door. Papers were spread across the table, what looked like bank documents and ranch accounts. "I spoke with my father this morning," she said, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. "Made him promise to give up gambling for good." "How did he take it?" Taylor asked, leaning against the edge of the table. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "I think yesterday scared him badly enough that he is finally ready to change, or at least I hope so." "Change is possible," Taylor said, "if someone wants it badly enough." "I have been thinking," Jennifer said, gathering her courage, "about what you said last night about paying forward kindness, about how your sister's buyer gave you that money to help someone else." "Yes. It seems to me that kind of generosity should not stop with just one act," she said carefully. "That may be the right way to honor what you did for me, is to find a way to help someone else when I can." Taylor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "I think that is an excellent philosophy. I also think," she continued, her heart pounding, "that you should not have to be alone on your ranch in Wyoming. That maybe you deserve someone who understands what you did and why, someone who values the same things you do." The smile faded, replaced by something more cautious. "Jennifer, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I would like to get to know you better," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it is forward of me, and I know we only just met, but I have never felt so seen by anyone as I did when you looked at me yesterday. And I think you felt something too, or you would not have told me about your sister, about carrying that money all these years." "Even if that were true," he said slowly, "I am leaving in a few days. I have a ranch that needs tending, and you have a life here in Bonanza." "A life that nearly ended on an auction block yesterday," she reminded him. "I have nothing here but a father who destroyed everything we had, and a town that will always remember seeing me put up for sale like livestock. Is that really a life worth staying for?" Taylor pushed away from the table, crossing to the window to stare out at the street below. His shoulders were tense, his hands gripping the windowsill. "You do not know me," he said quietly. "You do not know what kind of man I am, what my life is really like. You are grateful right now, and that is understandable, but gratitude is not a foundation for anything lasting." "You are right," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I do not know you yet, but I would like to, and I do not think what I am feeling is just gratitude. I think it is possibility." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Possibility," he repeated softly. "The possibility that two people who have both seen hard times might understand each other," she said. "The possibility that loneliness does not have to be permanent. The possibility that sometimes the right person appears exactly when you need them most." "And if you are wrong," he asked, "if you follow me to Wyoming and discover you hate the life there, hate the isolation and the work, then I will leave," she said simply. "I am free now, remember. You made sure of that. I can make my own choices, including the choice to take a chance on something that scares me." Taylor reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, and it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. "Do you know that?" "I am ordinary," she corrected. "But maybe I am ordinary in a way that fits with your ordinary." He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "That might be the strangest and most perfect thing anyone has ever said to me." "So you will let me try?" she asked hopefully. "Let me spend these few days getting to know you before you leave, I think," he said, his hand still cradling her cheek, "that I could not stop you even if I wanted to. And I find I do not want to." They spent the rest of the day together, walking through Bonanza and talking about everything and nothing. Jennifer showed him the small house where she had grown up, now owned by someone else. They walked along the creek that ran behind the town, sitting on the bank and tossing pebbles into the water while they shared stories from their childhoods. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that his mother had died when he was young, that he had taken his first cattle drive at 15 to help support his father and sister. He learned that she had always loved reading, that her mother had taught her to sew and cook and manage a household, that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before circumstances made such dreams impossible. The more they talked, the more Jennifer felt her initial impression confirmed. There was something between them, some fundamental compatibility that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. They thought alike, valued the same things, found the same quiet humor in life's absurdities. By the time the sun began to set, she was certain she had made the right choice in pursuing this, in being bold enough to say what she felt. They had dinner together again that night, and this time when he walked her back to the boarding house, he took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, this simple acknowledgement that something was growing between them. "Tomorrow," he said as they stood at the bottom of the steps, "I have to spend most of the day at the bank finalizing some business, but perhaps you could join me for lunch." "I would like that," she said, reluctant to let go of his hand. "And Jennifer," he added, his voice serious, "I want you to be sure about this. Really sure. Because if we continue down this path, if we let this become something more, I will not be able to let you go easily. I need you to be certain that this is what you want." She looked up at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and realized that he was just as scared as she was, just as uncertain about whether this strange, sudden connection could become something real and lasting. "I am not certain about anything," she said honestly, "except that I want to find out. Is that enough?" He smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Yes," he said softly, "that is enough." The next few days passed in a blur of discovery and growing affection. Jennifer met Taylor for lunch each day, and they would spend hours talking, learning each other's rhythms and patterns. She discovered that he was unfailingly patient, that he never raised his voice even when frustrated, that he had a dry wit that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. He discovered that she was stronger than she looked, that she faced hard truths without flinching, that she had a fierce loyalty to those she cared about. On the third day, Taylor took her to meet his banker, a stout older man named Horace who had known him for several years. "So this is the young lady you have been telling me about," Horace said with a knowing smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Miller." Jennifer blushed, pleased that Taylor had spoken of her to others. They sat in Horace's office while he explained Taylor's financial situation with impressive frankness. The ranch in Wyoming was small but profitable, with a herd of about 200 cattle and good grazing land. Taylor had been saving money steadily, investing wisely, and while he was not wealthy, he was financially stable and secure. "Of course," Horace said with a glance at Taylor, "the offer I made still stands. If you wanted to expand by the adjoining property, I could arrange financing." "I am considering it," Taylor said, "but such a decision should not be made hastily." As they left the bank, Jennifer asked, "What adjoining property?" "The ranch next to mine is for sale," Taylor explained. "It would nearly double my land and herd size, but it is a significant investment. I have been weighing the pros and cons for months." "What is holding you back?" she asked. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Honestly, the knowledge that running a ranch that size alone would be nearly impossible. I would need help, a partner. And until recently, I could not imagine finding someone I would trust enough to share that kind of responsibility with." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Jennifer felt her heart race. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I can imagine it," he said. "Which terrifies me, because we have known each other less than a week." "My mother always said that when you know," Jennifer said. "She told me that she knew she would marry my father within 3 days of meeting him. They had 40 years together before she died." "But what if you are wrong?" Taylor asked, and she could hear the fear beneath his words. "What if this feeling is just the intensity of the situation, the drama of what happened? What if it fades when real life sets in?" Jennifer took both his hands in hers, looking up at him earnestly. "Then we will deal with that if it happens. But Taylor, I do not think it will. I think what we have is real and rare and worth taking a chance on." That evening, Taylor asked to meet with both Jennifer and her father. They gathered in the boarding house's small parlor, and Marcus Miller looked nervous as he shook Taylor's hand. "Sir," Taylor began formally, "I would like to ask your permission to court your daughter properly, with the intention of marriage if we both find ourselves suited." Marcus blinked in surprise, then looked at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. "You want to marry Jenny," Marcus said slowly. "You have known her less than a week." "I am aware," Taylor said, "which is why I am asking to court her properly to give us both time to be certain." "But yes, sir, if she will have me, I intend to marry your daughter." "What kind of life can you offer her?" Marcus asked, and Jennifer was surprised to hear a note of protective concern in his voice, the first sign of real fatherhood she had seen from him in months. Taylor outlined his situation honestly: the ranch in Wyoming, the work involved, the isolation and hardship of frontier life. He did not embellish or promise more than he could deliver. When he finished, Marcus looked at Jennifer. "Is this what you want, Jenny?" he asked. "Truly." "Because you do not owe this man anything, no matter what he did for us. You are free to choose your own path." "I know," Jennifer said gently. "And this is the path I am choosing, not out of obligation but because I believe Taylor and I could build something good together." Marcus was silent for a long moment, his weathered face working through complicated emotions. Finally, he nodded. "Then you have my blessing," he said to Taylor. "But I am trusting you to take care of her, to treat her with the respect and love she deserves. If you do anything to hurt her, you will never need to worry about that," Taylor interrupted quietly. "I give you my word." After Marcus excused himself, Taylor and Jennifer sat together on the worn settee, her hand in his. "So we are courting now," she said with a smile. "Officially." "We are," he confirmed. "Though I confess I am not entirely sure what that means in practical terms, given that I need to return to Wyoming soon." Jennifer's smile faded. She had been trying not to think about his departure, but it loomed over them like a shadow. "When are you leaving?" "I had planned to leave tomorrow," he said, "but I could stay a few more days if you want more time." "A few more days would not change anything," she said practically. "We would still have to part eventually, unless—" She trailed off, the idea forming even as she spoke. "Unless," he prompted. "Unless I came with you," she said, the words rushing out. "I know it is unconventional, but we could marry before we leave. Then I could come to Wyoming as your wife, and we would have all the time in the world to learn about each other." Taylor went very still. "Jennifer, that is a huge decision. You would be leaving everything you know, everyone you care about. You should not rush into that." "What am I leaving?" she asked. "A father who nearly sold me to pay his debts. A town that saw me on an auction block. I have nothing here, Taylor. No prospects, no future. But with you, I could have a real life. A home, a purpose, a partner." "You hardly know me," he said, but she could hear the hope creeping into his voice despite his reservations. "I know enough," she insisted. "I know you are kind and honest. I know you value hard work and keep your promises. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. That is enough to build on." "What about love?" he asked softly. "Marriage should be about love, not just practicality and convenience." Jennifer cupped his face in her hands, marveling at her own boldness. "I am falling in love with you," she said simply. "I think I started falling the moment you walked up to that auction block and saw me as a person worth saving. And I think you are falling for me too, even if you are too cautious to admit it yet." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I am terrified," he admitted, "of being wrong, of disappointing you, of failing at this like I have failed at so many other things." "What have you failed at?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I failed to protect my sister from being put on that block," he said. "Failed to be there when my family needed me most. Failed to build the kind of life that would make someone want to share it with me." "You did not fail your sister," Jennifer said firmly. "You were doing what you had to do to support your family, and she found happiness despite the circumstances. As for your life, I want to share it, if you will let me." He opened his eyes and looked at her with such raw emotion that it took her breath away. "Are you absolutely certain?" "I am certain that I would rather take a chance on this, on us, than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been," she said. "Are you?" For answer, he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Taylor rested his forehead against hers. "Then we will do this," he said. "We will get married, and you will come with me to Wyoming, and we will build a life together. And I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you are giving me." "We will be worthy of each other," Jennifer corrected. "That is how partnerships work." They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Jennifer wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in the bottom of her trunk, and carried wildflowers that Taylor had picked himself. Her father walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his weathered face as he placed her hand in Taylor's. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with quiet certainty before a handful of witnesses. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Taylor kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Jennifer's eyes. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the hotel. Marcus had used some of his own meager savings to pay for a modest meal, his way of showing support for his daughter's unexpected marriage. As they ate, Taylor held Jennifer's hand beneath the table, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I wish your mother could have been here," Marcus said to Jennifer, his eyes distant. "She would have liked this young man of yours. She always had good instincts about people." "She would have," Jennifer agreed softly, feeling the bittersweet ache of her mother's absence. As the evening wound down, Marcus pulled Taylor aside for a private word. Jennifer watched them from across the room, unable to hear what her father was saying but seeing the earnest expression on his face. Taylor nodded seriously, then shook Marcus's hand with what looked like genuine warmth. When Taylor returned to her side, Jennifer asked, "What did he say to you?" "He told me that you are the best thing that ever happened to him, and that if I take good care of you, I will find you are the best thing that ever happened to me too," Taylor said. "Then he apologized for the circumstances that brought us together, and thanked me for seeing past them to the remarkable woman beneath." Jennifer felt tears prick her eyes. "He really said all that?" "He did," Taylor confirmed. "I think your father loves you more than you realize. He just has not known how to show it while drowning in his own shame." They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in the same room where Jennifer had first come to talk to Taylor just days before. She was nervous, suddenly aware of how much her life had changed in less than a week, but Taylor was patient and gentle. They talked for hours, lying together in the darkness, sharing hopes and fears and dreams for the future. "I want to make you happy," he said, his arm around her shoulders as she rested her head on his chest. "I am not always good with words, and I work long hours, and I can be stubborn, but I will always try to be the husband you deserve." "I do not need perfect," Jennifer said. "I just need honest and kind, and you are both of those things." They left Bonanza the next morning in Taylor's wagon, loaded with their few possessions and supplies for the journey to Wyoming. Marcus came to see them off, embracing Jennifer tightly. "Be happy, Jenny girl," he whispered against her hair. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." "I will write to you," she promised. "And you write back, tell me how you are doing. Promise me you will stick to your word about the gambling." "I promise," he said. "I am going to make you proud, make your mother's memory proud. I will find steady work and live an honest life from now on." She wanted to believe him, but she had heard such promises before. Still, she hugged him back and hoped that this time would be different. As the wagon rolled out of town, Jennifer looked back only once, watching Bonanza shrink into the distance behind them. She felt no regret, no second thoughts. Whatever lay ahead in Wyoming, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The journey north took nearly 3 weeks, following rough trails through the mountains and across the high plains. Taylor proved to be an excellent traveling companion, patient with her inexperience and willing to teach her the skills she would need for frontier life. He showed her how to build a proper campfire, how to recognize safe water sources, how to read the weather in the clouds and the wind. She proved to be a quick learner, adapting to the hardships of trail life with a resilience that clearly impressed him. They talked constantly during those long days on the wagon seat, sharing stories and opinions and observations. Jennifer learned about Taylor's time on the cattle trails, the adventures and dangers he had faced. He had been caught in stampedes, crossed swollen rivers, faced down rustlers and wild animals. He spoke of these experiences matter-of-factly, not boasting but simply sharing the realities of his life. She told him about her childhood in Bonanza, about the years before her father's decline when they had been a happy family. Her mother had been warm and loving, her father successful and engaged. They had hosted dinners and attended church socials, and Jennifer had assumed her life would follow a predictable, comfortable path. When her mother died, everything had begun to unravel. "You ever resent him?" Taylor asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Your father, for the choices he made," Jennifer considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but mostly I just feel sad for him. He loved my mother so much, and when she died, part of him died too. The gambling was his way of trying to feel something, I think. To have some sense of control over a life that felt out of control." "That is a generous way to look at it," Taylor observed. "I learned from the best," she said with a small smile. "You paid $7,000 for a stranger's freedom and asked for nothing. If that is not generous, I do not know what is." "I got something out of it," he said, reaching over to take her hand. "I got you." The terrain gradually changed as they traveled north, the dry Colorado landscape giving way to the rolling plains and distant mountains of Wyoming. Taylor pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about previous trips through this country. He seemed to know every creek and canyon, every good camping spot and potential danger. As they drew closer to his ranch, Jennifer noticed Taylor growing quieter, more pensive. Finally, she asked what was troubling him. "I am nervous," he admitted. "About you seeing the ranch for the first time. It is not much, Jennifer, not compared to what you might have expected when you agreed to marry me." "I never expected anything grand," she assured him. "I just expected a home." "Our home." They arrived at the ranch on a clear afternoon in late August, the sun bright overhead, and the wind carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. The property was indeed modest, a small log cabin, a barn in need of some repairs, a few outbuildings, and vast stretches of open range where cattle grazed in the distance. But to Jennifer, who had spent the last months in a cramped boarding house room, it looked like paradise. "It is beautiful," she breathed, taking in the view. Taylor looked at her skeptically. "You do not have to pretend." "I am not pretending," she insisted. "Taylor, look at all this space, this freedom. We can build whatever we want here, create whatever life we can imagine." "How is that not beautiful?" His expression softened, and he helped her down from the wagon. "Come on, let me show you the house." The cabin was larger inside than it appeared from outside, with 2 rooms and a loft. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room with a stone fireplace at one end. The second room was the bedroom, simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Everything was scrupulously clean but sparse, the home of a man who spent little time indoors. "I know it needs a woman's touch," Taylor said, watching her explore. "I was never much good at making a place feel like home." Jennifer ran her hand over the smooth wood of the table, clearly handmade with care. "Did you build this?" "Most of the furniture, yes," he said. "During the winters when there is less work outside." "You are very talented," she said, admiring the craftsmanship. "Taylor, this place just needs some curtains, maybe some rugs, some personal touches. The bones are good. We can make it warm and welcoming together." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Taylor worked long days tending the cattle and maintaining the property, while Jennifer focused on making the cabin into a home. She sewed curtains from fabric they bought on a trip to the nearest town, planted a small garden near the house, and slowly added comfort and beauty to the stark interior. She learned to cook on the fireplace, to preserve food for the winter, to manage the practical demands of frontier life. But more importantly, they learned each other. They discovered how to communicate without words, reading each other's moods and needs. They learned to work together, to support each other through challenges and celebrate small victories. And slowly, carefully, they fell deeper in love. One evening in September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Taylor said, "I have been thinking about that adjoining property." Jennifer looked at him with interest. "The one the banker mentioned?" "Yes," he said. "If we bought it, we could significantly expand our operation. Build a real future here. But it would mean taking on debt, and I swore I would never do that after seeing what it did to your father." "Debt for a sound business investment is different from debt from gambling," Jennifer said practically. "If the numbers make sense, if we can afford the payments, then it is worth considering." "I was hoping you would say that," he said with a smile, "because I already spoke to Horace about it. If we are careful, if we work hard, we could make it work." "Then let us do it," she said. "Let us build something big enough that our children will inherit a real legacy." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Our children," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They bought the adjoining property that fall, doubling their land and herd size overnight. The work became even more demanding, but Jennifer threw herself into it with determination. She learned to ride well enough to help with moving cattle, to brand and doctor animals, to handle the 100 tasks that frontier ranching required. Taylor hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and slowly their operation began to thrive. That first winter was hard. The snow came early and stayed late, and there were days when Jennifer wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in coming to Wyoming. The isolation was sometimes overwhelming, the work exhausting, the cold brutal. But whenever doubt crept in, Taylor was there, steady, patient, loving. He never complained about the hardships, just dealt with each challenge as it came, and his quiet strength gave her the courage to do the same. They grew closer during those long winter nights, sharing hopes and fears in front of the fireplace. Taylor told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build one of the finest cattle operations in Wyoming. Jennifer shared her desire to create a real home, a place of warmth and safety that she had not had since her mother's death. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved," she said one night, "to never doubt their place in the world or their worth as people." "They will," Taylor promised, "because they will have you as their mother, and I cannot imagine a better foundation than that." Spring came eventually, bringing relief from the cold and a burst of new life to the ranch. The cattle had survived the winter well, and several cows gave birth to healthy calves. Jennifer planted a larger garden, determined to grow enough vegetables to feed them and the ranch hands through the next winter. She also discovered she was pregnant. She told Taylor one evening after supper, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. He stared at her in stunned silence for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." "In late December or early January, the doctor thinks," she said, laughing at his excitement. "So we have several months to prepare." He became even more protective of her after that, insisting she not overwork herself and constantly checking to make sure she was all right. Jennifer found it both endearing and slightly frustrating, as she felt perfectly capable of continuing her normal routine. But she appreciated the care behind his concern, the way he so clearly cherished both her and their coming child. As her pregnancy progressed, they worked together to prepare a nursery in the loft, building a cradle and sewing tiny clothes. Taylor proved surprisingly good at woodworking, creating a beautiful rocking chair for her to use while nursing. They argued good-naturedly about names, neither willing to concede to the other's choices, finally agreeing to wait until the baby arrived to decide. Letters arrived periodically from Jennifer's father, each one bringing news of his progress. He had found steady work at a mercantile in Bonanza, managing inventory and helping customers. He wrote that he had not gambled since the day she married, that he was saving money and trying to rebuild his reputation. Jennifer wanted to believe him, and the consistency of his letters gave her hope that perhaps he really had changed. In November, Taylor's sister Caroline and her husband Jacob came to visit, traveling from their ranch in Kansas. Jennifer had been nervous about meeting them, unsure what they would think of her, but her worries proved unfounded. Caroline was warm and welcoming, embracing Jennifer like a long-lost sister. "I am so glad Taylor found you," Caroline said as they prepared dinner together while the men were outside. "I have worried about him being alone out here for so long." "He told me about what happened to you," Jennifer said carefully. "About the auction." Caroline's expression grew serious. "It was the worst day of my life," she said quietly, "until it turned into one of the best. Jacob is a good man, and we have built a wonderful life together, but I never stopped being grateful that things worked out the way they did. Taylor used the money Jacob gave him to pay my father's debts," Jennifer said. "Did you know that?" "I suspected," Caroline said with a smile. "That is exactly the kind of thing my brother would do. He has always had a need to fix things to help people." "He saved my life," Jennifer said simply. "In every way that matters." The visit lasted a week, and by the time Caroline and Jacob left, Jennifer felt like she had gained not just in-laws but true friends. Caroline made her promise to write often, to share news of the baby when it arrived, and to visit them in Kansas when travel became easier. The baby arrived on a snowy night in early January, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's storm-gray eyes. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from the nearest town who had come to stay with them for the last weeks of Jennifer's pregnancy. Taylor paced the main room for hours, wearing a path in the floorboards, until finally the midwife emerged with a squalling bundle in her arms. "You have a son," she announced, and Taylor nearly collapsed with relief. He held his boy with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Marcus Xander, after Taylor's father and Jennifer's, and he became the center of their world. Taylor proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Jennifer for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his rumbling voice. Jennifer watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing new depths to the man she had married. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years. The herd grew, their reputation for quality cattle spread, and they were able to hire more help and make improvements to the property. They added onto the house, building a proper parlor and additional bedrooms. Jennifer's garden expanded into a small orchard, producing fruit that she canned and preserved for winter. 2 years after Thomas was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah Rose. She had her mother's honey-colored hair and a temperament as sunny as her brother's was serious. The house rang with children's laughter, and Jennifer often paused in her work to simply marvel at the life they had built. Marcus wrote faithfully, and his letters told of continued progress. He had been promoted at the mercantile and had even begun courting a widow in town, a kindly woman who ran a boarding house. Jennifer was happy for him, pleased that he seemed to have finally found stability and peace. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Taylor took Jennifer to the spot where they had first arrived on the ranch, now beautifully improved with a proper road and a painted fence. "You remember what you said when you first saw this place?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "I said it was beautiful," she recalled, "and you thought I was just being polite." "I did," he admitted. "I could not imagine how anyone raised in town could love this rough, isolated life, but you have proven me wrong every single day since. This is where I belong," she said simply. "With you, with our children, building something that will last. I have never regretted coming here, not for one moment." "Even during that first winter?" he asked with a smile. "When you could barely feel your fingers and we were snowed in for weeks?" "Even then," she confirmed. "Because I was with you, and that made even the hardest days bearable." He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a simple gold locket, engraved with their initials and wedding date. "I know it is not fancy," he said, "but I wanted you to have something to mark this occasion, to remember how far we have come." She opened the locket to find 2 tiny photographs inside, one of Thomas, one of Sarah. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the precious faces of their children. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." He fastened it around her neck, then turned her to face him. "Thank you," he said seriously, "for taking a chance on a stranger who bought your freedom, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and a future I never dared to hope for." "We gave those things to each other," she corrected, just as she had on their wedding day. "That is how partnerships work." They kissed as the sun set over their land, over the home they had built together through hard work and dedication and love. In the distance, they could hear their children playing under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. They added a 3rd child to their family, another boy they named Daniel, who had his mother's green eyes and a mischievous streak that kept them constantly on their toes. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the region, and Taylor's reputation as an honest, fair businessman spread far and wide. Jennifer became known in their small community as a woman of great kindness and strength, always ready to help a neighbor in need. She organized social gatherings that brought the scattered ranching families together, started a small school in their parlor for the children in the area, and quietly assisted families who were struggling. Taylor often joked that she had inherited his tendency to rescue people, but he said it with pride and love. Marcus eventually remarried and moved to Denver with his new wife, where he managed a successful dry goods store. He visited the ranch once or twice a year, delighting in his grandchildren and marveling at the life his daughter had built. The shame and desperation that had once defined him seemed like a distant memory, replaced by contentment and quiet dignity. "I was wrong about so many things," he told Jennifer during one visit, watching Thomas help his father with the horses. "But the one thing I got right was raising a daughter strong enough to save herself when I could not save her." "Taylor saved me," Jennifer corrected gently. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Taylor gave you an opportunity, but you are the one who had the courage to take it. You could have stayed in Bonanza, found safe work, lived a predictable life. Instead, you chose to take a chance on something unknown, and look what you have built." Jennifer looked around at the thriving ranch, at her children playing in the yard, at Taylor walking toward them with that slow smile that still made her heart skip. "I just chose love," she said simply. "Everything else grew from that." When Thomas turned 18, he began to take on more responsibility for running the ranch, showing the same dedication and work ethic his father had always displayed. Sarah proved to have a gift for managing the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and negotiating prices with buyers. Daniel, the youngest, had a way with horses that bordered on magical, able to gentle even the wildest animals. Watching her children grow into capable adults filled Jennifer with profound satisfaction. She and Taylor would sit on their porch in the evenings, his arm around her shoulders, and marvel at what they had created together. "You ever think about that day in Bonanza?" Taylor asked one such evening, 20 years after they had first met. "About how differently things could have turned out?" "Sometimes," Jennifer admitted, "but not with regret, only with gratitude. Everything that happened, as terrible as it was at the time, led me to you, led us to this." "I nearly did not bid," he confessed, something he had never told her before. "I stood there watching that auction and I almost walked away. I thought about just giving the money to a church or a charity instead, avoiding the personal entanglement." Jennifer turned to look at him, surprised. "What changed your mind?" "You did," he said simply. "You stood on that block with tears on your face but your chin up, refusing to let them break you. I saw such strength in you, such fierce dignity, and I knew I had to help. Not just because it was right, but because I recognized something in you that called to something in me. And now here we are," she said softly. 20 years, 3 children, and a life neither of us could have imagined." "The best life," he said, kissing her forehead. "The only life I ever want." They grew old together on that Wyoming ranch, watching their children marry and start families of their own. Thomas took over the main operation of the ranch, expanding it even further with Taylor's guidance. Sarah married a banker from Cheyenne and moved to the city, though she visited often with her growing family. Daniel started his own horse breeding operation on a portion of their land, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest cutting horses in the territory. Jennifer and Taylor became grandparents many times over, and their home remained the heart of the family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. Jennifer filled the house with love and laughter and the smell of fresh baking, just as she had always dreamed of doing. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every corner of the expanded house, and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Taylor stood to make a toast, his hair now silver but his storm-gray eyes still sharp and clear. 40 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, I made the best decision of my life. I paid $7,000 for a woman's freedom, asking nothing in return, and somehow ended up receiving everything that matters. Jennifer, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend, and the mother of my children. You took a chance on a stranger and built a life beyond my wildest dreams. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Jennifer stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and raised her own glass. And I took a chance on a cowboy who saw me as a person worth saving when no one else did. You gave me freedom, Taylor, but more than that, you gave me a home, a family, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge. These 40 years have been the greatest gift of my life. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and their children and grandchildren crowded around to embrace them. As the celebration continued into the night, Jennifer and Taylor slipped away to their porch, seeking a few moments of quiet together. Do you think those people in Bonanza ever imagined this? Jennifer asked, looking out over the land they had built together. When they saw me on that auction block, do you think any of them could have predicted this ending? I doubt it, Taylor said. I certainly could not have predicted it. I just knew I had to help, had to give you a chance at something better. You gave me everything, she said, leaning into his embrace. And I like to think I gave you something too. You gave me a reason to stop wandering, he said quietly. A place to belong, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a family and a home and showed me what it means to truly love someone. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their family celebrating inside, to the night birds calling across their land, to the whisper of the wind through the grass. It was a perfect moment, the culmination of a love story that had started in the most unlikely of places. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, surrounded by his wife and children. Jennifer mourned him deeply, but she was comforted knowing that he had found redemption and peace in his final years. Taylor's health began to fail when he was in his mid-70s, his body finally succumbing to the decades of hard physical labor. Jennifer nursed him with fierce devotion, just as he had cared for her through every illness and difficulty over the years. Even as his strength waned, his love never did, and he spent his final months surrounded by family, at peace with the life he had lived. On a clear spring morning, with Jennifer holding his hand and their children gathered around, Taylor Xander passed quietly from this world. His final words were simple and true. I love you, Jennifer. Thank you for everything. Jennifer lived for another 7 years after Taylor's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom had inherited the strength and kindness that had defined their grandparents' marriage. She often sat on the porch in the evenings, looking out over the land that she and Taylor had built together, and she felt his presence beside her still. She never regretted the choice she had made on that long-ago day in Bonanza, when a stranger had paid for her freedom and changed the course of her life. She had taken a chance on love when logic told her to be cautious, and that choice had given her everything that mattered: a partner who cherished her, children who honored her, a life rich in meaning and purpose. When Jennifer passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, she was surrounded by 3 generations of family, all of them living testament to the love story that had started on an auction block in Colorado. Her children laid her to rest beside Taylor on a hillside overlooking their ranch, with a simple stone that read, Jennifer Marie Xander, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She chose love and built a legacy. The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of their descendants, who never forgot the story of how their family began. They told it to each new generation, the tale of a cowboy who paid $7,000 for a woman's freedom and asked for nothing, and the woman who had the courage to offer him everything. It became a legend in their family, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the darkest moments, and that choosing to believe in possibility can change not just one life, but countless lives for generations to come. The ranch house still stands today, restored and cherished by the Xander family, with photographs of Taylor and Jennifer hanging in places of honor. Visitors can see the original cabin where they started their life together, the nursery where their children were born, the porch where they spent countless evenings watching the sunset together. It serves as a museum now, a testament to frontier life and enduring love. But more than the physical structures, what remains is the legacy of their love, a legacy that taught that true freedom comes not from the absence of obligation, but from choosing who and what we commit ourselves to. Taylor gave Jennifer her freedom, and she chose to give it right back to him, binding her life to his not out of debt or duty, but out of love freely given and joyfully received. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them. That courage means taking chances even when the outcome is uncertain, and that real love grows not from perfect circumstances, but from two imperfect people choosing to build something beautiful together. From an auction block in Bonanza, Colorado, to a thriving ranch in Wyoming, from desperate strangers to devoted partners, Taylor and Jennifer Xander created a love story for the ages, one that proves that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings, and that choosing love, even when it seems impossible, is always the right choice.